Surf splendor.
I've got notes on my phone, so I'm not texting people while we're talking. Just FYI.
You can text your girls, man. It's cool.
And then I'll give you a proper introduction and post-production so we can just roll straight into conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we will obviously talk about your program and diet and all that sort of stuff, but more interested in your origin story and how you discover surfing and Brad and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, yeah.
I'll start with a question that you can both actually answer, but Paul, you'll lead us off. Mm-hmm. What do you think is going on culturally right now that is fueling people's interest in radical self-improvement?
Oh man, you're going to make me go real deep right from the beginning. You didn't even warm me up first.
But it is a thing now. People are, and that's what people are interested in that for surfing as well. When I was growing up, my dad, he ran a little bit, he lifted weights a little bit, but it wasn't like it is now where people are like, I don't know if it's because they have more information or.
Yeah, I think that, I wonder if it's, I have a couple thoughts on this. So I wonder, humans are sicker now. Like we're much sicker than we were a few generations ago. And I wonder if it's access to information. And I think part of the zeitgeist now is this interest in longevity, but also health span. This idea that you can do more longer. And that's just become a part of our consciousness now. So I think that when you want to do more longer, if you want to surf longer in your life, if you want to run, or you want to do martial arts, or you want to dance, whatever you want to do longer in your life, you can do that longer if you just pay attention to what you're doing in your life. So if you improve the quality of your life day to day, the foods you eat, how you live, you can extend the time in your life that you get to have fun. So I think that that's probably a part of it. Also in that framework is the fact that we're much sicker because the food supply is very different and our lifestyle overall, I think, is worse for us now than it used to be. So, but I think that it's just, I don't know. People are I do think you're right. I think people are very interested in that idea of being able to do a lot with their lives. And it's a big part of what I do. That's the reason that I do what I do, is because I think that the mainstream medical paradigm is false. This idea that no matter what you get sick with, we have a pill for you. It's no matter what you're sick with, we have a pill for you. And no matter what you're sick with, it's just your bad genetics. That's a really interesting kind of idea that I rebel against, and that's why I stopped doing the medicine that I was trained in.
It's crazy that the concept of food and diet is the solution to chronic illness, or not only repairing chronic illness, but even reversing it. It's crazy that that's controversial. Right?
It's pretty wild.
Like the idea that you could come up through the medical system, educational system, and come up with that conclusion through research, and people resist it.
Yeah. People resist it because there's not 10 double-blind, placebo-controlled trials that show it. We've become so blinded. We're so myopic in Western medicine now that if there's not a funded, huge study that's highly powered to show that something is true, it's not true. It's just the craziest thing. We've lost all common sense and intuition as doctors.
So in your academic background, when you're coming to these conclusions, did you encounter any actual overt resistance?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't. You realize pretty quickly in medicine. So first I went to PA school, which is physician assistant school, and I worked in cardiology. And that was when I first was in medicine and I saw what was going on. I was treating patients, and I became pretty unhappy and disillusioned with the whole perspective. And that was why I went back to medical school, got my MD, and then went to residency. So going into medical school, I kind of knew what I was getting myself into because I dipped my toe in the water as a physician assistant, and I knew that I wanted to do something a little different. I had no idea I was going to be doing what I'm doing today, but I knew I wanted to do something a little differently when I went back to medical school. But pretty quickly you realize okay, this is the medicine system. I'm not going to rock the boat too much or I'm going to run into some trouble here. And in the beginning, you're a student, so you kind of realize okay, I'm a student. I'm not going to rock the boat too much. But after you go to medical school for 4 years, you do a residency. So you're at MD, you have a license to practice medicine, but you still have to be a doctor in training for another 4 to 5, depending what residency you do, 4 to 5 years. And it was really in residency that you realize okay, I'm a doctor, but I should probably not rock the boat too much here.
So what did you think you could do professionally?
What do you mean?
where would you find a home coming out of that system? I mean, obviously now with the internet and having access directly to, you know, fans or whatever, you can build a life, but did you have an idea for what you would do professionally when you came out of that?
Yeah, I thought I would just have a medical practice, but I knew it would be a non-traditional medical practice. So, so when I was in medical school, so you go through 4 years of medical school, and around your second or third year, you think about like, what do I want to do? What kind of doctor do I want to be, quote unquote? And my dad is an internist, so that he did internal medicine, and I liked internal medicine, but it felt kind of overly academic to me, it just felt a little bit stuffy to me. And I actually really liked psychiatry. I found human story very interesting, depression, anxiety. Like these are the things that are at the core of who we are as humans. And so I ended up going into psychiatry with this interest in like neuroinflammation, the way that inflammation from our body is translated to our brain and can affect our moods. But I didn't end up practicing psychiatry because there's this other perspective in Western medicine that the body can be subdivided into 100 different organ systems, this balkanization of the body. You know, if you're an endocrinologist, you deal with the thyroid and you deal with the pancreas. When I was a PA and I did cardiology, the cardiologist would literally mime this to me, outlining the box of the heart and say, you think here, the heart. And I think, what are you talking about? Like, this is your cardiac health. Your cardiac health has way more to do than just the actual heart. And the same with the brain, whether you're a neurologist or you're in psychiatry, thinking about how the brain works, like this has to do with all of the cells and this sort of milieu of inflammation in the human brain. And that's not what you get in mainstream psychiatry either. They do want to just chop you off at your head and say, no, everything we do is above the head. It's just in your mind. And we don't deal with inflammation. We don't deal with the health of your gut. We don't deal with these things. I remember being in my residency in psychiatry and starting to talk to people about diet. And at that point was when the sort of the supervising physicians would say, oh no, we don't talk to people about nutrition. We're psychiatry. Like you can't look at inflammation. I would order tests to see how much inflammation someone had in their body and they would cancel the test. We don't do that. Yeah. Even though we know that inflammation in the body affects the brain. So that was really my first inclination, or one of my first inclinations, that something is wrong in the way that we're thinking about this in Western medicine. And you do get this kind of subtle, not so subtle pressure to back off and just do it the way everyone else does it in medicine. And so in that process of training, I quickly became disillusioned, and I realized, like, wait, what are you talking about? Like what is happening in my whole body affects the brain. And I quickly came to the conclusion that the same things that trigger neuroinflammation in the brain are the things that trigger eczema, a skin disease, or psoriasis. They're the same things that trigger autoimmune thyroiditis, a disease of your thyroid disease, a disease of your thyroid gland. It's the same stuff that really is at the foundation of even heart disease. People have strokes, people have heart attacks. Like the same things are triggering depression, heart attacks, eczema, psoriasis, autoimmune thyroid disease. But that's not the way Western medicine thinks about it. I see it like spokes on a wheel, and it all comes back to this central hub. But Western medicine thinks about it at the outside of the wheel, and there's 10,000 different diagnoses. When I really came to believe pretty early on, like, no, it's just like, there's just a few things that go wrong with humans in the center. And if you can correct that, almost everything gets better.
What are those things?
It has to do with diet and lifestyle. It's just the way we live our lives, And I think that there's this overlay in our life of our genetics and our environment. So your genetics are different than mine. You're taller than me. We both have brown hair, but maybe we have different colored eyes, and everyone comes into this world with a genetic footprint, a genetic basis of their life. Western medicine it really kind of tells us your genetics are your life. But then we learned about this thing called epigenetics, which is the way your genes are turned on and off. So there's this alphabet, there's a book, there's a little literal book of life that you have, all of the A's and T's and C's and G's, these genetic bases, this basis in your DNA, which become RNA and then proteins. But then there's a question of how the genes are turned on and off. But there has to be, if you want to be optimally healthy in your life long-term, we really have to understand what your genes are hoping for, and we align the environment with that. And then really amazing things happen, or reversal of chronic disease can happen. But when there's a discordance between our genetic foundation and our environment, and that can come in eating the wrong foods. It can come in messing with your circadian rhythm, staying up too late, looking at your phone, not getting enough sleep. Like lifestyle and dietary misalignment with your genetics is where we get sick.
It feels like the further we go through the technological revolution, the further we get away from that alignment that you're talking about. Like the more modern conveniences there are, yes, whether it's the phone or even food conveniences, it's misaligned with the original kind of connection.
That word that you said is a word that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is convenience. And I think it goes back to this sort of historical evolutionary story of us as humans. 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens as a species generally thought of 350,000 years of history as Homo sapiens. Previously, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, before that, Australopithecine species. But as Homo sapiens, we have 350 to 400,000 years. And in that time, convenience was survival. If you could figure out how to do something more easily, you did it, right? You could take this path to get there. That's faster. But now there are so many of these tendencies that we have. We're animals, we forget this. We have these animal, quote unquote, tendencies, and they're being leveraged against us by businesses that are pretty smart and have realized what kind of products they can make to leverage these tendencies against us. And our environment is just kind of happening around us in ways that make it difficult with these tendencies. And one of those tendencies is convenience. So if you can give someone something faster, like a food, we're always going to go for that, or easier, right? I don't have to spend time cutting and chopping and cooking and then cleaning dishes. And you're absolutely right. Like, I think that's a huge reason that so many of us are unhealthy. And look, I get it. We all lead busy lives, quote unquote, busy lives. I don't have kids yet, but I know Brad does. And so we know that okay, now we have to take care of children and spend time with families, and we're running businesses. So we all have things to do in our lives. And if we rely on convenience, we often make choices that are not great when it comes to food or lifestyle. So it's almost like you have to be a rebel. You have to rebel against convenience and do things that are harder, but more intentional. And that means everything in terms of health. I'm traveling here in Los Angeles right now. I usually live in Central America. And while I'm traveling, I have to be in rebellion against convenience. I'm not going to eat what's in the airport, right? My flights got diverted a little bit. I was delayed. My bag got lost. And I had to do extra work before I got on the flight to make my food, right? To bring it on the plane. This is a pain in the butt, but I've just realized this is worth it to me. But I think that a lot of us don't realize how important those against the grain, upstream, against the current choices are in our daily life. And if we just kind of go with the flow, we end up in less than optimal states.
It takes planning, obviously, and preparation. And then the other thing is, I noticed if I am on a tight diet and feeling good, one slight deviation, I notice the difference feeling wise. But when I'm in times where I'm indulging all the time, then the deviation doesn't feel that bad. And so I think so many people are so deep into the convenience stuff that it's like, oh, who cares? I could eat on the plane this time or from the airport,
It's like signal and noise, right?
Yeah,
the idea that if your baseline noise goes down, you're more sensitive to more subtle signals.
Yeah.
So if your baseline noise is fairly high, and you kind of always wake up with a little bit of stiffness in your back or your knees, or you always don't sleep well, or you always have a little bit of a headache, or you're always a little bit irritable, or you're always a little bit depressed. I think a lot of humans, and I say this with compassion,
totally.
A lot of people, this is our lives as humans. We're always a little bit inflamed. We're always a little bit in pain. We're always a little bit depressed. We're always a little bit irritable. We're always a little bit underslept. And then, you eat a Big Mac, you're like, you don't really feel it.
And the endorphin boost or whatever it is that you do get beneficial.
Yeah.
Weighs out all that other stuff. It's like, that tasted good. It got me away from what I was stressed about for 5 minutes.
Exactly. And so when you take down the noise, like what you said is so illustrative, and I've seen it in so many people's lives. When you simplify the diet, and we can talk about my paradigm and how I think people should simplify the diet, depending on their goals. When you simplify the diet, you see all these little spikes that are, the ways that you're not going to feel as good. And people don't like that necessarily, but they're super valuable signals for the things you're doing in your life. I notice it for myself. I notice it a lot now. I know I can, it's almost like I'm too sensitive, and then there's the line that you have to walk between, all right, I'm going to try not to go too far because I know that every once in a while, maybe I want to go to a restaurant with my friends or I want to, I'm going to eat a piece of birthday cake for my child's birthday. These are fine. These are things that we can do in our lives. We just understand what's happening. We're like, I might not feel great tomorrow, and you're going to notice it, but you're going to know exactly why. And then when you know why, it's much easier to change that.
It really
and you can make
is.
the intentional choice. Yeah.
Brad, where were you at in your life when you were introduced to Paul, and why does all this resonate with you so well?
I think I'm on two years at least of trying to follow, as I understand, ancestral. It's like an ancestral diet, which is I learned that you can get everything from meat, and also that the plants have got they emit a toxin to protect themselves, and they don't want you to eat their seeds, and because that's their babies. I'm going to put it in a super simple form, dude. And that
Paul can correct later.
That 100,000 years ago, we were drinking water from a stream, and we see a piece of fruit. We're like, oh, great, eat a piece of fruit, and there wasn't agriculture, and so that I just kind of went, okay. I've always a long time ago I did sort of the Atkins diet for a little while, and I noticed that my stomach was like when I did that, it kind of settled down and it felt like bloated or like just gassy. But then it was just too much because I hadn't added the fruit part. And so with Paul, I was like, I feel better when I eat meat and salad and I don't whatever. But I stopped the salad and just went, okay, I'm just going to eat meat, fruit, kind of, and just start to learn more and more with like, well, chicken, it's all right, but the cow has like, and I'm going to butcher stuff here, but like it has 4 stomachs and there's more enzymes and there's just, it's just better for you. Cow, bison, maybe deer, and then, I just went, I'm going to try it for a month and see how I feel. And I could eat and I could train in like 15 minutes after eating. I wasn't burping and I could eat that way. And my energy felt amazing. And especially when I started doing liver. And I noticed when I ate liver, I was like, oh, there's that taste that you can't get away from that my mother was trying to hide in those in the mashed potatoes. And I'm like, Mom, it's in there. And I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna eat it. A couple friends were like, after a while, you start liking it. And I'm like, okay, that taste never really goes away, but it's not so kind of whoa when you eat it more. Yeah. And I noticed I got like a lot of energy, and having 2 kids, surfing, owning my own business, I need energy. And I also kind of have a sense that coffee isn't something you ought to do. Like maybe you could have one in the morning, but like don't really rely on coffee. Like it'll probably mess your sleep up and all that kind of stuff. So I just started following Paul and listening to what he was saying on Instagram. And then after a while, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get the book. And I got his book and I listened to it and I read the book. And it's really hard to with the book. I've read a lot of books. I have a wide vocabulary, but there were so many words in there that I was like, I have to look this one up. Okay. I'll underline it and I'll do it later. I'm like, whoa, I have to look this one up. And it's because he's a doctor and he's giving you the science behind it, which is kind of what he said earlier here, is that there needs to be a double-blind placebo test and a large test for anybody to believe that it's actually true. And so what I did is I'm going to try the diet and see how I feel. And I'm still on it. And I did see when Joe Rogan had done the diet, and he sort of said, I did it, I felt great, but I decided I think he said something like, I'm gonna do it for most of the day, and then at dinner I'm gonna eat whatever the fuck I want. That's the quote from what he said. And I thought, oh, that's cool. Maybe I'll do it that way, because I was finding myself at people's houses and going, yeah, I can't eat any of that. Nah, I can't eat that. I can't eat this. So I was like, okay, I'm going to let myself at dinner kind of, I'll eat whatever I want, but I pick out any kind of plant. I still find myself just kind of covertly taking out the plants and trying to eat as much as only the meat and the fruit part. And I feel like way, way, way better. And the reason I'm interested is because I want to have fun. I want to surf for, I've had kids late in my life. I want to surf with my kids when I'm 70, and I don't want to be on a walker or I want to be like, I want to access my full potential as a human. And the more I learn, the more I realize there's so much poison out there.
So,
and yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, can you say more about why plants are bad?
Yeah. So this is a fairly controversial notion.
Yeah.
So when you think about animals, think about a cow. Like Brad was describing, a cow is a ruminant. Sheep are ruminants. Goats are ruminants. Deer, bison, etc. They eat grass. They have a special stomach and they can digest the grass. They have a rumen, and they can make food that we can't eat into meat for us, right? But if you're hunting a deer, for instance, I don't know, Brad's never hunted, he said, but we're going to go hunting. Have you ever hunted?
I have not. No.
It's very hard. These animals are crafty. And historically, they can tell when humans are around. A bison is a little slower than a deer, but a bison is also a massive animal and it's very hard to kill. But, Native Americans did kill a lot of bison, but I've hunted deer with a bow and a rifle. They're very hard to kill. Animals can run away from you. And if you tried to kill a deer with your bare hands, it might gore you or kick you, right? Animals have sort of built-in defense mechanisms. Contrast that with a plant. You can look outside. Any of the plants outside here, they're rooted in the ground. That's just the way plants and animals have evolved. The divergence of plants and animals was probably, I think it's 400 to 500 million years ago. So many, many hundreds of millions of years, plants and animals have evolved. And in that 400 to 500 million years, plants and animals have been at chemical war the entire time, because animals eat plants. Some animals eat plants. Herbivorous animals like cows or deer, they eat plants. And plants are smart. Whether or not plants have a consciousness is probably the subject for a different podcast, but plants do interesting things. There's evidence that some plants can sense the vibration that comes from a caterpillar eating their leaves, and in the adjacent leaves, they upregulate defense chemicals. So plants do this. Because plants are rooted in the ground, over that 400 to 500 million years, they've evolved to have defense chemicals. There's a whole host, hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of defense chemicals, depending on the plant. And these defense chemicals are there to discourage and dissuade insects, fungi, humans, deer, buffalo, antelope, elk, whatever, from eating the plants. Now, on the flip side, animals can also develop mechanisms to deal with the chemicals, to detoxify the chemicals. One of the hypotheses is that the reason that we have this detoxification systems in the liver, they're known as like the 𝗕𝗶𝗄𝗆 systems in the liver, is to detoxify these chemicals from plants. Like the liver is a pretty incredible organ. It does a lot of detoxification and prepares compounds for excretion in the human body. So animals can respond to the chemicals, but then plants can change the chemicals again. So there's this kind of back and forth chemical warfare that's been going on. And so what we realize, or my perspective is like, okay, look, plants are clearly giving us a signal. They have leaves, and the leaves are there to gather energy from the sun, and they turn that sun energy into sugars, which they use for energy. It's pretty incredible. That's photosynthesis. So the leaves are like plant solar panels. And then you have a stem, and then you have a root. And all of those parts of the plant are necessary for the plant to live. It doesn't want you, quote unquote, there's some anthropomorphization here, but plants don't want us to eat their leaves, their stems, or their roots. They also don't want us to chew and destroy their seeds, because ultimately all of a plant's life cycle, just like humans, is to pass their DNA to the next generation. They want to make more plants. How do they do that? They make seeds. And different plants have figured out that they can either distribute their seeds with like helicopters, you know, like the dandelion has these things that go on the wind. But a lot of plants have figured out they can put their seeds into a fruit. And that is the definition of a fruit. We know it as like either a strawberry or a blueberry or a cherry or a peach. These are fruits. And fruit is interesting because some plants have figured out they can take their seeds and they can encapsulate them in a sweet piece of food for plants. So clearly there's a secondary communication going on here. The plant is offering its fruit to us saying, oh, please eat this, right? And then please consume the seeds. You might chew some of them, but please don't chew all of them. So you can deposit my seeds in your poop, which is, we know, a great fertilizer, and my offspring will live on somewhere else. This is just the way it works. But when you look at that, you also realize that the seeds are very highly defended because plants don't want us to kill the seeds either. Sometimes when we're eating fruit, we automatically consume seeds, a blueberry, a strawberry. But some fruits are much more protective of their seeds, like a peach. So if you eat a stone fruit, any of the stone fruits have this. It has that very hard carapace on the seed. And if you open the carapace, there's actually a seed inside of that. And if you look at that seed in an apricot or a peach, it is toxic. It contains high levels of cyanide and cyanide derivatives. Many people don't know this, but the FDA, the USDA have actually recalled some trail mixes because they had apricot seeds in them, because the apricot seeds are so high in cyanide that you could actually potentially get sick by eating apricot seeds. The same thing with apple seeds. You may have, people always said like, don't eat apple seeds. There was this adage when you were a kid, if you bit into an apple and you ate the seed, you were like, oh no, I don't know if you ever heard that. Like, don't eat the apple seeds because the apple seeds contain cyanide type derivatives. So the seeds of plants can be highly defended. And when you look at our food supply in the United States, a lot of foods that we eat are made from seeds. And then a lot of people trying to be healthy make the majority of their diet the leaves, stems, and roots of plants. Now, I'll say this at this point, and I'll emphasize it. Those foods are much better than highly processed junk food.
Clearly.
But for some people, not everyone, the defense chemicals are difficult or they can accumulate in the human body and cause issues. And the sort of ironic, frustrating thing here that's interesting is that a lot of us, when we're trying to be healthy, sometimes sabotage ourselves. So we're trying to eat, quote, healthy foods, oatmeal, wheat bread, spinach salad. And those foods are not healthy for all people because those defense chemicals can accumulate. And there's different defense chemicals in every plant, different defense chemicals in every seed, and they can cause issues. I'll just give one example and then I'll pause. Spinach is perhaps the best example. So spinach is Popeye, right? Which is actually, the whole idea of Popeye and the cartoon kind of came from a mathematical error. One of the scientists looking at the amount of iron in spinach put the decimal point in the wrong place.
No way.
So they estimated the amount of spinach, the amount of iron in spinach to be 10 times more than it actually is. And iron is a mineral that we need to make red blood cells. A lot of women can become iron deficient because they have menstrual periods every month. Some men can become iron deficient in certain parts of the world, but generally men don't have as much of an issue with iron deficiency. So I don't know when Popeye was exactly crafted, maybe the 60s or 70s, maybe the 80s. I remember watching cartoons of Popeye when I was growing up. It was this idea like you could eat a can of spinach and you got strong. Well, it's not really, it doesn't really work that way. Spinach has some vitamins and minerals. The iron in spinach is not very bioavailable. And spinach also contains quite a lot of a compound called oxalic acid or oxalates. And oxalates are really interesting because oxalates are a part of the most common kidney stone in humans, which is a calcium oxalate kidney stone. 60 to 80% of kidney stones, potentially more in humans, are calcium oxalate. I've never had a kidney stone. My dad had kidney stones growing up, and he passed one time, and he showed it to me in a medicine bottle. It was like a pretty big pebble that had spikes on it. It looked really, really painful. And I could imagine that for people that have kidney stones, if that little spiky rock is in your kidney or coming out your urethra, whether you're a man or a woman, that's going to be excruciatingly painful. But that was a calcium oxalate kidney stone that he had. So it's interesting that the oxalates in spinach are very, very high. There's about 700 milligrams of oxalates in a cup of cooked spinach. And that's a huge amount more than you're going to get in so many other foods. The body makes a small amount of oxalates per day as breakdown of certain amino acids, but you can get probably, and like multiples of amounts of oxalates more than that by eating spinach. So what do people make in the morning now? What's a healthy smoothie? I'm going to take spinach. I'll put in some soy milk, which has some oxalates. I'll put in some almonds or almond milk. Almonds have oxalates. Maybe I'll throw in some turmeric. That has more oxalates. I'm putting in all the oxalate high foods, but that's not an uncommon smoothie. Almond milk with spinach and turmeric. That's a huge amount of oxalates. And for a lot of people, that compound, which isn't a vitamin, it's a waste product in the human body that you can get huge amounts of in your food, can cause major issues, whether it's kidney stones or joint pain. That's an example of the fact that not all foods that we think of as healthy are great for all people.
There's a lot there.
Isn't there?
Well, a couple of thoughts though. Just so there is beneficial, vitamins, minerals, nutritional benefit to spinach, let's say, as the example.
Sure.
And then there's those negative things in it. I wonder if we'll get to a point in processing or cooking to where you can isolate the benefits and not get the negative stuff. Just like with an animal,
right?
You advocate for eating the cow. We don't eat all the cow. We know the parts that are nutritional.
We do eat we could eat almost the whole cow.
Could we?
Yeah. That's another thing we could talk about. Yeah. The whole cow is nutritious. Almost the entirety of the cow. Yeah.
Speak to me about the benefit of organs.
So this is exactly what we're talking about, right? So when you go to the butcher, you see the butcher cabinet. I think a lot of Americans don't even go to the butcher anymore. We kind of lost them, but they're in some grocery stores today. And you're going to see filet mignon, you're going to see ribeye, you're going to see New York steak, you might see sirloin, maybe you'll see chuck roast. These are all muscle. They're all cuts of the animal. It's very rare today that you'll go to a butcher and see a heart.
Yeah.
Or you'll see a liver, or you'll see a testicle. In certain parts of the world, you can get testicle. Where I am in Central America, if you go to a carniceria, you see more of that stuff. You might even see brains in a carniceria, depending where you are. But there's way more parts of an animal other than the muscle. Animal muscle is meat, and it's very valuable for humans. And it contains a lot of nutrients. And just to kind of tie it back into what we were talking about with spinach, if you look at the vitamins and minerals in spinach, those all occur in meat.
Got it.
Right? And it shouldn't surprise us, because what has the cow been eating its whole life? Maybe not spinach, but it's been eating grass. So like a lot of the nutrients, I would argue all of the nutrients that we find in vegetables, save for fiber, which is a separate conversation, basically occur in meat, because the cows concentrate these things. And when cows are eating grass their whole life, they have more of these nutrients, because grass is what a cow is supposed to eat. It's not supposed to be fed grains in a feedlot. It's a whole separate story. But you have muscle meat. Muscle meat is very nutritious for humans. We know that muscle makes strong kids, strong adults. There was a recent study, I think it was a 2014 study I saw in Kenya, and they had a control group, which was just kids eating something called, I'm trying to think of the name of it's like a traditional local porridge. It's basically like a vegetable and grain soup in Kenya. So they had one group of kids that had the vegetable and grain soup. I think it's called, I'll think of it, 𝗕𝗏 or something. It might be what it's called. One group, they add oil to the soup. So they just have the soup and they add a little oil to it. One group, they have the soup and they add a milk to the soup. And one group, they take the soup and they add meat to the soup. And they feed this to elementary school kids for 2 years. And at the end, the kids who ate the meat soup were scoring the best on all measures in school, whether it was memory or recall or verbal or mathematics scores. So there's lots of really interesting randomized controlled trials in humans showing that meat is critical for our development, and many unique nutrients in meat. But like you said, there are these organs that we think of. And, I think traditionally, it's probably a French word, the offal or the offal, ironically, are the organs, things like liver, heart, spleen, pancreas, intestines, brain. And we almost never eat these as humans. It's not part of our culture, but other cultures do eat them. Asian cultures eat them. A lot of Hispanic or Central American or South American people, traditions have eaten these organs. And when I went to Africa a few years ago, I spent time with the 𝗲𝗄𝗆. They're some of the last remaining hunter-gatherers on the planet. They're in Tanzania near Lake Eyasi. And what was striking to me, and the reason I went to visit them, was because of the way they hunt and eat foods. And when I looked across every anthropological study I could find, all of the Native Americans and hunter-gatherers, we all ate the whole animal. Like our historical brethren, no matter what your ancestry is, whether it's African, I mean, we all are descendants potentially, you know, depending on the anthropology and the ethnography of these African peoples. That's one of the leading theories, is that perhaps the distant relatives of the 𝗕𝗄𝗄 were some of the first Homo sapiens, and then they branched out and went to other places in the world 70,000 years ago. And then, you know, the lineages diverged. But, you know, our history as humans has come from people, and currently living hunter-gatherers, they all eat all of the organs. So when they kill an animal, and when I was with them, they hunted baboons, but they sometimes hunt things like, they're sort of like deer, like large deer, like other ruminants, or they'll hunt, you know, small monkeys. They hunted cats. There was like a cat. They hunted like a small cat. There was a little tiny ruminant animal called a 𝗕𝗿𝗃 that they hunted. It was like a little tiny deer, but they don't waste anything, right? They'll break the bones and suck the marrow. They'll eat the brain of the animals. In fact, the brain goes to the hunter that killed the animal. It's a very prized part of the animal. They'll eat the liver. So I was with them and they killed a baboon, and it may sound barbaric, but this is how they live because their hunting lands are sort of being encroached upon in Tanzania. So we kill this baboon, and the first thing they do is they take the baboon, they throw it on a fire, and they burn the hair off, and they cut it open, and we all share the organs. So they cut off a little liver, and everyone eats a part of the liver. And then they, you know, the kidneys and the pancreas, we all share and the heart. Everybody shares the organs. And then we take the baboon back to camp, and then we eat the meat with the whole tribe. And the next day I show up, and the hunter who killed the animal shows me the animal's head, and we roast it together, and he offers me part of the brain. So I ate part of baboon brain. And
so it's cooked by the roasting of the head?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that to this day, you know, some people, I mean, who knows if that baboon brain affected me negatively. We'll see how the sanity goes long term. You know, it might explain some things about my trajectory as a human. But the point that I'm making in a slightly verbose way is that we have always eaten the organs of animals, and there's both nutritional sustenance for this and historical evidence that it's a good thing. But if you look at the nutrients in meat, they're very complementary with the nutrients in something like liver. Liver is an organ that I think about a lot. I think that it's a good organ for people to eat, because if you ate one organ, just eating a small amount of liver can really get you unique nutrients. Brad and I had a little bit, and I mean a little bit, of frozen liver, half an ounce maybe, before the podcast. And you look at like liver, for instance, is high in copper, but meat is high in zinc. And liver has zinc too, but meat doesn't have a lot of copper. Liver is high in folate, but there's not a lot of folate in meat. Meat has B6, which is pyridoxine, and meat has B12. Both of those also occur in liver, but there's not a lot of folate in the liver, in the meat, excuse me. Liver is also higher in biotin. So there's B vitamins are complementary between the two. Minerals are complementary between the two. And then there's a few other nutrients and things that are like don't often occur as much in the meat. So if you just eat meat, you can be pretty healthy, but you will develop a folate deficiency. You will not be getting enough biotin. You probably may or may not be getting enough choline. You won't be getting enough copper to balance the zinc. So it's very interesting that, like, if you eat a whole animal, you really will get an interesting suite of balanced nutrients. And I think that, so my history, my story is that I had very bad eczema. I was in my residency, and I remember I got eczema so bad one time that it was all around my hips and my back and my chest. It was a very serious eczema flare, and it was on my arms. And I went on a date with a woman, and she said, "What happened to your arms?" And I don't know why. I was so embarrassed to tell her that it was eczema that I said, like, "Oh, I was out surfing at the coast in Washington, and I was in a patch of like poison oak or something." But that's how bad it looked. It looked like I had poison oak on my arm from the eczema. And that was about the time in my life that I just got fed up, and I thought, I'm just really going to simplify my diet. So for a year and a half, all I ate was meat and organs. And that really helped the eczema. In fact, it completely cleared up the eczema. What I learned long-term for myself, and kind of came full circle on this, was that, okay, like just eating meat long-term puts humans into ketosis. And I think that's hard for a lot of people. My body didn't do well with the electrolyte shifts that happen with ketosis. So once I added back the least toxic plant foods, the parts of plants that plants want you to eat, things got a lot better for me. And I kind of shifted my perspective. That's humility, right? We learn over time, we grow, we evolve. But I was always eating organs throughout that. So I think that there is a lot of value in just eating meat, and it can certainly improve people's autoimmune disease. But long-term, if we add some carbohydrates to that in the form of plants, it's very complementary as well. But when you're eating meat, having the organs with it whether fresh or frozen or like desiccated organ capsules. There's lots of ways to get organs today. It really does improve the nutrition. I think of liver as like a vitamin or like a medicine. It's so nutritionally dense that you don't need to eat a lot and you don't even need to eat it that often. It just improves who we are as humans. Because again, we kind of get back to this overlay of genetics and environment. There is an optimal for us as humans. And if we give our body the micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals, so there's a suite of B vitamins, but there's also fat soluble vitamins, right? And we give our body minerals along with those vitamins, like everything inside of us works well. We are the most complicated, elegant thing. We're incredibly complex biochemically, but all of those little gears and levers within our biochemistry, like a very complex watch, need cofactors. And that's what we get from our diet. So eating organs is at one level about just helping to complete the suite of nutrients and nutrition to allow all of this biochemistry inside of us to work well.
I wanted to ask one more question because you were going on one area and I didn't want to interrupt, but when you talk about the seeds being bad, there's also seed oils.
Right.
And that seed oil thing is everywhere in every product we look in. And it's like, you look and you go, gosh, I hope this thing doesn't have seed oils. Sure enough, it's got seed oils.
Oh yeah, it does.
Could you just say a little thing about the seed oils? Because I think that's a dangerous thing, right?
Yeah. So first I'll clarify that seeds are seeds, nuts, grains, and beans. Those are all seeds because if you plant all of those, they grow into plants. So a lot of things we think of as beans or grains, those are all seeds. So there are all of those seeds, nuts, grains, and beans. These all have defense chemicals. They're all difficult for humans to digest. Some indigenous cultures have figured out ways to ferment them. And, perhaps if you pressure cook beans and you can ferment them, they're less problematic for humans. But I think it's a powerful intervention for humans to get rid of the seeds, all of the seeds. But seed oils are a pretty crazy thing. So we're talking about corn, canola, sunflower, safflower, soybean, grapeseed oils. They're refined, bleached, and deodorized oils. And the process of making a seed oil is it's extremely industrial and it's very harsh. You can imagine, I did a piece of content recently that I don't think it's been posted yet, where we talked about how many ears of corn you would have to eat to get the equivalent of 5 tablespoons of corn oil. The average American eats 5 to 7 tablespoons of seed oils per day. It's a very major source of calories for us. Between your Chipotle burrito and everything's cooked in seed oils, you're eating tablespoons of seed oils. So to get 5 tablespoons of corn oil or any equivalent seed oil, you'd have to eat 60 to 70 ears of corn. And you can imagine if you're making oil out of the corn, it's, 60 ears of corn goes into 5 tablespoons of oil. That's a pretty harsh process. Same thing with like soybeans or sunflower seeds and the corresponding oil. So soybean oil is the most commonly consumed seed oil, and you'd have to eat 2.5 pounds plus of soybeans to get 5 tablespoons of oil. 2.5 pounds of soybeans. No one has ever eaten that in the history of humans. Same with rice. Chipotle uses rice bran oil. You'd have to eat, we did the calculation, I forget the number. It's something like 25 cups of uncooked rice, and an impossible amount to get 5 tablespoons of rice bran oil. So the point is just that these are evolutionarily, historically inappropriate amounts of oils that are very harshly created, and they're very fragile oils. So when you expose an oil that's very polyunsaturated to temperatures in excess of 450 degrees Fahrenheit, the oil basically is damaged very quickly. There are oils, and this is a whole set of chemistry that we don't have to go into. There can be saturated, unsaturated, or mono or polyunsaturated. And it just has to do with the number of double bonds in the oil, in the fat molecule. And a fatty acid with 1 double bond is a monounsaturated fat. A fatty acid with 2 or more is polyunsaturated. And a fatty acid with no double bonds is a saturated fat. And it has to do with the saturation of the carbons with hydrogens. So when a carbon-carbon bond has a double bond, it has an unsaturation point because there are less hydrogens bonded to those carbons. None of that is terribly important. It's just the nomenclature, but you have these polyunsaturated oils, and they're much more susceptible to peroxidation, which is just a fancy word for rancidity or damage, like rust. The rusting process is an oxidation process of metal. You can oxidize an oil, and then it does bad things in your body. So these oils are pervasive. They're ubiquitous. They're cheap. They're good preservatives. And I think that they're pretty major contributors to chronic illness in humans. So if you do nothing else other than eliminate seed oils from your diet will massively change out of necessity because there are so many foods that contain these.
Great info. HelloFresh.com/freesurf. Surfing, food, and wine, those are my passions that occupy my time and my headspace. But as adulthood and fatherhood has demanded more and more of my time, the act of surfing has gone from a daily exercise to a weekly thing. And the same thing has applied with shopping for meals. It's so consuming, and honestly, it's a bit wasteful. Whether it's buying a jar of something that I only need a tablespoon of, or maybe just a bunch of celery when I only need 2 stalks of it, an embarrassing amount of groceries either go into the trash at the end of the week or they just rot in the cupboard for a year until I do a deep cleaning. So HelloFresh has really simplified and streamlined our dinner life with pre-portioned ingredients delivered right to our door. These are restaurant quality, easy to make meals with simple instructions, and it's also less expensive and healthier than any takeout that we order. And they have over 50 different recipes to choose from each week. The menus are seasonal. So this week we have autumn-inspired dishes like shepherd's pie if you want something filling, or there was an herbed salmon over apple and kale salad that was great last week. We also loved the creamy cilantro flank steak bowl with garlic lime rice and charred greens. And again, this is all delivered to our door, pre-portioned, and it's easy to make. So go to HelloFresh.com/freesurf to sign up. We will get you 10 free meals applied across 7 boxes. That's for new subscribers only, and it varies by plan, but it is 10 free great restaurant quality meals just by going to HelloFresh.com/freesurf. It is America's #1 meal kit for a reason, and in fact, one that I have been using since 2017, believe it or not. So that's HelloFresh.com/freesurf. How did you discover surfing?
I remember I was in Seattle going to residency at the University of Washington. And I went to Tofino. I had a truck and I went to Tofino and I was camping out and I saw people surfing and I thought, that looks really fun. Why don't I do that? Because so after college, I took 6 years off. My family's always been very supportive and I was a ski bum. I thru hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. I walked from Mexico to Canada and I had basically 6 years just kind of living in search of outdoor experiences and nature and wilderness. So I spent a lot of time on trails. I got into mountain biking. I got into road biking. I got into skiing. I got into backcountry skiing, like very, very minor, very like easy mountaineering, nothing too crazy mountaineering, but I did some ski mountaineering at the time. And so I really loved being in the wilderness. And my struggle had always been, as I continued in my life, what do I do in the summer? Because in the winter I could go ski. And that was one of the main reasons that I went to residency at the University of Washington, is because they have 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and Crystal, and there's some good mountains in the Pacific Northwest. And being in the mountains was, for me, the coolest flow state, to get on a ski slope, or actually better to get off the ski slope and go in the backcountry or the side country, to find a bit of powder, to like link turns on a line. Like being in the moment was really intoxicating. And so I loved moving in nature. I got into mountain biking, but it was never really my thing in the summer. And it just felt like, man, I'm just going to break a collarbone. It's not going to be good. And so I saw these people surfing in Tofino and I was like, why don't I do that? Like, it's the summer. This looks really fun. And I remember I drove back from Vancouver Island, and on my way back, and granted, remember, I'm a resident at this time. I'm not making a lot of money. I'm kind of living hand to mouth. And I took whatever savings I had. I went to the surf shop and I was like, I need everything for surfing. And I got a wetsuit, which I think was probably a hooded 4.3 at the time, because it's cold as heck in Washington. And I remember I got a 6.6 LibTech, which was way too small for my first board. And I started surfing. I remember I rolled up the next weekend. I took my truck out to 𝗏𝗏𝗏 in Washington, and I just showed up at the beach. And I remember looking over at a guy next to me and going like, how do I do this? Like, he's like, what do you mean? I was like, I've never surfed, but I want to try. You got any pointers? He's like, just kind of shook his head at me and like walked into the ocean. And I was like, I don't know what to do here. Like, what do I even do? I mean, I wish I'd known somebody like Brad at the time or had some coaching, but I'm still pretty rugged and not very good at surfing, but the first few years of surfing were pretty rough. Just paddling out there and trying to figure it out.
It's a tough place to learn as well.
Yeah, it's very tough.
I mean, did you buy surf magazines? Did you have a favorite surfer? Did you watch YouTube videos?
I don't think.
Did you know who Kelly Slater was?
I probably did pretty quickly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I probably did. But, like in the beginning, I'm just trying to like, how do I even catch a wave? I just want to, in the beginning, like the first 6 months of my surf career were just about learning to pop up. I did I tried. I think I probably watched videos on popping up. I'm not trying to do cutbacks. I'm not trying to snap off the lip. I'm just trying to do a pop up.
Well, what I'm always curious about with people learning like that is, why do you keep going? Like for me, or for a lot of people, they get obsessed with the culture first. And so that's the draw and they want to get good at the thing. Yeah. But if you're not obsessed with the culture and it's that hard to learn and it's that cold, what was it that kept you coming back?
I think it's flow state. And it's just, I love being immersed in nature. So I'm really grateful to have had those experiences in that 6 years between college and going to graduate school to do the physician assistant stuff in cardiology originally. I think that so many of the experiences we have in our younger years shape us as humans. And I mean, as a young man, as a 21-year-old man, I was out on the Pacific Crest Trail for 3.5 months in the wilderness. So I'm super grateful. And I think that that's just gotten into my blood, for lack of a different way to say it. And I just love being in wild nature. Yeah. And I've always enjoyed that surfing feels a little bit like wilderness. I mean, it's not always like wilderness. Sometimes there's a lot of people around you, but as soon as you walk off the beach, you're in the ocean. Like that's wild for a human. I'm probably evolved from a fish, but I'm not a fish. So and especially in Washington, there's a lot of days you're surfing and there's not a lot of people around and you can just be there in the ocean. Maybe a dolphin swims by. Hopefully nothing else with sharper teeth swims by, but you can look around and all you would see would be eagles overhead. And if I'm in 𝗕𝗶𝗍, Washington, for instance, or 𝗕𝗶𝘁, I mean, these are gorgeous places. Westport, sorry guys, it's not the most beautiful scenic place and the locals can be a little bit cranky, but I get it. But a lot of places in Washington are just beautiful. And I would take my truck out, I would camp on the beach, sleep in my truck and wake up, and just waking up and then looking at the ocean and then, getting my wetsuit on and just walking into the ocean. Like that's just even before I've gotten in the ocean, it's a very rich experience for me as a human. And then I like hard challenges physically. I like moving my body in that way. And I think that it really hooked me in a way that I didn't expect. And, probably sometime within the first few months of surfing, I had some coalescence of timing and balance and was able to sort of stand up on a wave. Yeah. And then just like, boom, your whole brain lights up in a different way because it feels very different riding moving water than it does skiing powder. And I'd skied a lot of powder at that point in my life. And I love the flow state that comes from skiing powder. But even, I was surfing like thigh high waves, right? Like I'm sure the first wave I caught was like thigh high, if that, maybe knee high, but something about that really hooked me. Just this flow state and the way that your brain kind of locks into that was really intoxicating.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you say that. As somebody who's done all those other things, I'm glad to hear you say that surfing is different. I think it is.
It's very different.
I think it's a spiritual, but I hear people talk about, the only thing I've heard people talk about that feels somewhat similar is rock climbing. When I hear really passionate rock climbers talk about their thing, I'm like, oh, that's kind of like me and my thing,
I've had some moments skiing that kind of feel like it, and then when I started really loving surfing, I wanted to do everything I could to get better at surfing. So I skated as a kid, but it was just regular skateboards. And, I got a carve board. I was telling Brad, I got a carve board in Seattle. I remember I was just like trying to be on the carve board and like move and I almost got hit by a few cars on that thing. But, I was just trying to get better and feel the same feeling as surfing. And I took up snowboarding also because I thought, well, maybe snowboarding will help my surfing. I wanted to do anything I could to get better at surfing because I was into it. I lived 3 hours from the ocean, and I would go every weekend that I wasn't on call in my residency. But sometimes when I'm snowboarding, and I'm not a good snowboarder either, I'm a much better skier. Like you can kind of feel it, you put pressure on the tail and you're kind of surfing a little bit and it's bouncy and you get that weightless feeling. And yeah,
those elements are similar, but it's being enveloped in Mother Nature is different. Yeah. You're on a mountain, so you're in Mother Nature, but and in the ocean, things come at you quick and fast, and you have to really use your navigation skills and your smarts to survive it. Can you say how you were first introduced to Brad and WaveKi, and then what once you kind of engaged with the process, what were the benefits of it?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm still a squarely mediocre surfer. And one of the most challenging things for me about surfing is that it's hard to practice. You know, when I skied, you could go to a mountain and ride a lift and know, worst case scenario, I can ride groomers all day. I'm going to get 6 hours of turns if I want today. Like maybe the lifts are going to go down, but that doesn't happen that often. Like the conditions are variable, but I could go and actually ski and snowboard. The hardest thing I think for me with surfing is sometimes I show up and it's just closed out and it's impossible, or I can't actually get there, or there's no waves, or the waves are just too much for me at my level of surfing and I can't actually surf it. And then even when I would get in the ocean and surf, a good day for me is if I catch 5 waves, you know? So I might actually stand on the board for a minute cumulatively. If I'm lucky, I mean, 5 waves, that's probably less than a minute of surfing for me. And so, you know, some days I live in Central America. Some days now I'll catch 10, maybe 15 waves, and they're longer waves, especially if I go to like 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗃 or something. So I might get a little more experience, and I'm just hopefully getting to the point where I can catch more waves and start to feel a little bit of a progression. But what I like about what WaveKi is doing is that it lets me kind of practice on land, right? That's what I've always been looking for. Like, how do I learn this more when I'm not in the ocean? I need 9 hours a day on a lift because I'm one of these people that I want to get better at this. I really love the way it feels. And so it's funny. A guy that I've kind of connected with, like peripherally in Santa Teresa, messaged me and said, "Hey, this guy Brad has this program. You should check it out." And the same week, my friends in the ocean in Costa Rica that are much better surfers than me said, "Bro, you should check out WaveKi." And I was like, all right. And I actually went and just like bought it. You know, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to buy it. And then like later that week, I'm texting with Brad. I'm like, dude, I just bought your program. This is so cool that I get to connect with you because I wanted to learn this stuff. So fellow surfers recommended it to me. And then a guy in Santa Teresa said he knew Brad and that Brad was actually trying to get in touch with me. And then Brad and I connect through Instagram, and then I see in my DMs, like he messaged me like a year ago. And of course I ignored him. I totally like left him unread. I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I wish I had.
Did you know who he was? Like in terms of his professional background? And all
no,
that
I didn't.
Stuff?
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
Cool.
No, that's part of what's interesting to me though, is like how, when I was young, there was only a couple ways to enter surfing. And it was like a couple of magazine portals, a couple of brands that maybe you were influenced by. And so everybody had the same education and like had the same cultural references. But in the modern world, people come in from all different angles and they don't know who is, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
which is fine. It's not better or worse. It's just interesting to hear the story.
Yeah, I knew about, you know, I've been surfing for probably 5 or 6 years now, and I've known about the surfers that are on tour now. You know? And I've watched them on tour sometimes, and it all happens so fast when they're on tour, and they make it look so effortless that I think like, why can't I just do that? You know? Like, I like to slackline. I'm not amazing, but I can do it, you know? And I imagine it's the way it looks to people. Like if I walk on a slackline, like my body just knows how to do it. Like it's kind of like riding a bike. Like I can get on a slackline now, maybe it's a 50-foot or a 40-foot line, and I can usually walk it now. I mean, I'm not an amazing slackliner either, but I like it. And then sometimes I'll bring people and they get on the slackline for the first time, and maybe it's the same thing. I imagine they're like, how can you do that? Like my brain just knows how to do it. And so that's what it must be like to me, is that these surfers, they just know exactly the motor pattern to do in the moment. And that's what I want to get. And so, yeah, it's been really cool to connect with Brad and to try and think like, okay, now I can like learn from someone who's a black belt at this and can help me correct all the small things, because it actually reminds me a lot of jiu-jitsu. I did a lot of martial arts when I was in medical school, and just like the technicalities and the precision required to do a move. Like if you finish the 𝗕𝗿𝗃 like this, it's the same with surfing. And like the blunt instrument in surfing doesn't work. Like I can just like paddle super hard and like my muscles don't matter. Like unless my hips are here and my shoulders are here and my head is here and it's like, wow, like this is a language that I need someone who actually is fluent in the language to teach me. Like I'm not going to learn Spanish just by babbling, you know, like.
Well, let's have Brad talk about that a little bit, is where athleticism diverges from the act of surfing or the art of surfing.
Yeah, Paul said something interesting about a language. So what I've grown up with is one of my mentors when I was a kid, his name's 𝗕𝗿𝗃. I've mentioned him before. Yeah. John's really a very artistic guy, a very, very good surfer, and very sort of expressive. And so he would, when I was young, like 14, he used to take me to all the contests. He's 4 years older, so 18 and 14 is a huge gap, you know. And he would describe waves and describe like doing certain turns and use hands and sort of sometimes kick his foot up, and it was just fun. It was super fun. And I think surfers around the world are describing their rides in using their hands and going like, yeah, maybe they use their fingers, they're doing stuff, but it's not quite the same as, with the WaveKi, it's basically like a language. And if you can learn the language, then a more experienced surfer can speak to a lesser experienced surfer, but even maybe an experienced surfer at a certain spot who knows the spot really, really well can also teach another advanced surfer what the wave does, or and using WaveKi as a language. So yeah, the language thing is perfect, because I think what happens with surfing is there's a lot of there's so much complexity, and there's so much going on, and it's all just done by feel. And so yeah, I learned to surf when I was 10. I made 4,000 million mistakes. I still do, and you start to find what works, what feels good, and you watch footage of yourself and you hate it, and everybody says, I don't even like to watch myself, and you're like, yeah, but you need to. And then you start, and through WaveKi, I slow everything down to 100th of a second, and that means there's 100 pieces at least in the bottom turn. And you may understand the first 30 and the last 30, but you miss out on the middle 40, and that's where we need to, this is what I'm doing with, it doesn't matter where you are on your level with surfing. I'm working with really high level surfers, and they understand and know a lot, but then there's a bunch of gaps there where they're like, I don't even know I was doing that, completely unaware. And so there's so much to unpack, because you're constantly dealing with a Mother Nature and a mysterious playing field, and you don't know what the wave's going to do, and the wave hits a certain bottom and you can't see that there's a deep spot right there, but you can feel it and you can sense it. So you have to be out. You can't be thinking while you're surfing. You've got to build all this stuff in a safe, controlled space, and it's a journey. It's not gonna. You're not gonna like, oh, cool, that's how you do it, bitch, and I'm gonna go do that in the water now. It just doesn't happen that fast, but through time, And so for someone like him who's learned to surf at 41 or 40 or somewhere in that, he said you've been surfing 5 or 6 years. I mean, he's looking out at people surfing on, that looks fun. I want to do that. You know what I mean? And fortunately, he's got the drive and the fortitude and the means and everything to like persevere and move himself to Costa Rica because he wants to do it. But even then, right? Like, how do I get from this point to this point on the wave? How do I aim the surfboard? All those things are answered in WaveKi. So, he's at the beginning of his journey, but
it's so helpful to have those cues, like it's like I need a book, like I need the cues for the language.
Totally.
They don't exist.
What's interesting though, I don't know if you've identified
WaveKi, but they don't. Prior to WaveKi, they don't really exist. It's more of a guiding. Hey, put your arm here. These are things. Wherever you look is where you're going to go. That is a very, very primitive way of doing it. You can look over here, but your hips don't turn over there, and your board, you are not going to go over there. The nose of the board is not going to go over there. You might go over there, but the nose of the board is not going over there.
Yeah.
And so what you want to be doing is having control and total awareness of where the nose is going to go. That's performance surfing. And that's why you're riding a small board. You want to surf. You want to performance.
Yes.
I don't know if you've identified this yet, and maybe Brad can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the genius of WaveKi that I've identified is that those lessons that he's putting out there for the beginner surfer applied to the professional surfer as well. There's kind of these fundamentals in surfing that if you adhere to, they're universal, no matter what level of surfing that you're at. And I've never seen anybody identify that prior in surfing.
Well, the thing is each time I made a discovery, I would look and go, okay, let me go back. Let me look at Tom Curran surfing in the 90s, because there's this film of him surfing there. Well, okay, well, let me go back to the 70s and see if, the stars of the 70s are doing the same thing. There they are. There's 𝗕𝗶𝗱𝗶𝗵 doing it right there. And one of my first heroes, Buttons, 𝗕𝗶𝘁. I'm like, oh, he's doing it right there. Okay, well, can I go back even farther? Oh, there they are in the 60s. There's 𝗦𝗵𝗍𝗱 doing some really radical surfing right there. And they're riding this really crude surfboards. And then let me go back into the 50s. Oh, yeah, Mickey Dora's doing it. And so is Phil Edwards. And 𝗕𝗶𝘂𝗶𝘚, and I'm looking at all these surfers going, they're doing it. They all have different anatomies, they have different bodies, but it's leverage. It's getting yourself into leverage so that you can turn the board with ease and harness. And you stop doing it with muscle. You do it with your body. And this is to answer your. This is a long way around to get to answer your question, but basically what I see is, and I wish I'd known this from early, is that there's a lot of unathletic movement in surfing. And so you get there's some athleticism, but there's almost more unathleticism. The unathletic part is when you are unweighting the surfboard. Basically, you unweight the surfboard when you're going from, say, the toe side rail to the heel side rail. You unweight it because you go down, get closer, you lower your bum, you get down lower to the surfboard so that you can make the turn, whether you're going on your toe side rail or your heel side rail. So this athletic thing, when you have somebody who's like an athlete, they tend to do everything athletic. So you get somebody who's like... You've done a lot of athletic things, and so you get people who are athletic or even former pro athletes in track and football and hockey, baseball, all these guys, and they bring their athleticism there, and they find it they get frustrated because normally they can outrun or they can do
Power
something like that. And this is about really softening and feeling, because the more you soften, the more you can get lower. You lower your center of gravity. When you lower your center of gravity, your senses turn on and you can feel the board and you can feel the wave more. And that's essentially sends it into your brain to know what to do, and, rather than having an agenda. Because that's what ends up messing us up, is this agenda. I would look at the waves, and when I was younger, and be like, it's good, I'm going out there, I'm going to rip it up, I'm going to surf so good. And I would get out there and I would bog and I would do things, and then it would be a domino effect in the wrong direction. And then I learned as I got older just to go out and have a super low expectation, stand there, breathe and wait and then no biggie, and don't try too hard, and then all of a sudden it would just click into the speed and the rhythm of the wave, and then boom, and then I could just bounce around wherever I wanted to go. Now I was a pro, so I could surf 3 times a day and stretch and devote everything to that. Now the people signing up to WaveKi most people are just surfers. They just want to surf. They want to improve. So they don't have 3 times a day. They don't have all this time, but you can do this stuff on the floor. And I believe that if you can't do it on the floor, your chances of doing it in the water are like they're a complete fluke. You might do something amazing and then never do it again, ever. And go, gosh, that turn I did. Like, I have turns I've done. I can remember like one turn I did in 1998 in Scotland, and I'm like, man, that felt so good. I got to do that again. That was before I developed WaveKi. I know now what I did, but I didn't know then how to recreate it. So it's kind of like that. That's the, like, it's, there's no delusions of grandeur here. Doing WaveKi is nowhere near as fun as surfing. Like, it's just not, you know.
No.
But you can bring your imagination to it, and you get better and better and better at. I mean, my former student 𝗕𝗏𝗺𝗵𝗵 has done like over 10,000 hours of WaveKi. He started when he was 11. He's one of the most powerful, stylish surfers in the world. And now he's 22, and he didn't even want to do it, but his dad is still just, I was like making him do it. But like, that's a kind of a representation of, if you really want it, if you really want to get better, you need to pick some time, just like with your diet, we're talking about convenience. You know, if you really want to be healthy and you really want to like elongate your fun, or for me, you know, I've got a 7 and a 5-year-old. Like I want to be throwing balls and running things and doing stuff, fun stuff. I want to fun down. I want to be like, oh yeah, my dad can't do it. He's too old. You know what I mean? And then, you know, then you figure out a way to, you carve out some time, and you put WaveKi in your daily routine. And it's the same as like when you go to like, you go to do karate. I remember going to do karate when I was a kid, and now the first thing, when can I be a black belt? You know, it's like, no one can say, if you do this, do that, you'll be a black belt. They'll just say, just keep coming. Yeah. Just keep coming, and after a while, you'll know, you'll get a sense, and you got to just keep doing it. Keep doing, asking questions and doing it.
Have you seen any benefit from doing it? And how long have you been doing it?
I've only been doing it for a couple months, maybe a month and a half.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've already seen benefits, but there's so much to know. I mean, even today we had a short surf session, and Brad just said, you know, when you paddle into the wave, keep your chest down and your hips up. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't great waves, and it was kind of crowded, but I could feel it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's super, super valuable. And, you know, every day I go out and surfing in Costa Rica, I'm always like, man, I hope I get the chance to like use some of these things, but it's definitely valuable.
This is the hard part. This is the part where you do the work, and then you make, it's like you do the work on the land, and you make almost like a deal with yourself, and you go like, since I've done the work, now I'm allowed to play. You're gonna let me play in the water. Because when you're in a playful mode, is when what you're doing the work on, you'll have more access to it. If you're trying to do it in the water, there's so many books that have described it, but even like sensei and Aikido is just like, you cannot access it. You just need to practice and forget, practice and forget, practice and forget, so that eventually these movements, they become a part of you, and you don't even think of it. It feels natural for you to understand how to steer the surfboard. It feels naturally, you're breathing better. So there's a lot of breathing things in WaveKi that especially in the takeoff, that's been modified. I keep modifying, keep finding, because it's about, like I said, when you're unweighting the surfboard, you're dropping down, you're dropping down to do a turn. You're either dropping down to get over your toe side or your heel side, depending on what you're doing. And you want that low center of gravity, so your body, like in an athletic mode. This is what I saw with your surfing online when you sent me the clips and stuff, is your back is your chest is up, and your back is you're in almost like, so you're in a weight bearing position, right? If you had a squat, that's the way you would do it. Because otherwise, if you flex your spine, you're in a dangerous position because you could slip a disc. Yeah. But that's in surfing, there is no weight. You're unweighting. It's soft. So you need to lower your pelvis so it goes down, so that you lengthen your spine. When you lengthen your spine, as you know, as a doctor, then your spine comes apart a little bit, and you're in a better position to twist. If your spine is like, you don't want to twist when you're load bearing, because you can hurt something, all right? So this, and so you're like, okay, I need to tuck my pelvis, but you forget that your chest is like this because possibly society is like telling you, hey man, don't slouch. Yeah. But really you need to soften your chest. And then, like I was saying about the chin being a little bit down too, you know, it lengthens the spine. And then you go, okay. And then I go show you like what Tom Curran looks like just before he does one of the most beautiful turns you've ever seen. And you're like, right, I see it now. His body is long, his pelvis is tucked, his bum is like, his sits bones are about 6 inches from his back heel. Wow. And he's twisted, and he hasn't even done the turn yet. the board is just flipped on the heel side rail and his head is turned and he can rip the turnaround with just an extension of the body. And so what I find is when people don't twist enough, they have to push the board. And when they have to push the board with the back foot, there's a big chance of digging rail, and no, it doesn't look so pretty. It's a shorter turn. It's so fascinating. We can surf without having, and this is why I think we can surf better as we age, as long as we stay fit and and the sleep thing that you're talking about, and food and energy. And of course, as you age, if you have a family, you need to be, you want to take care of your family, which means you need to be there, which means you probably don't have time to surf as much as you did before. You know what I mean? And hopefully the kids want to surf, and then you can surf with them later, and and on and on and on. But like it's a big picture. Like I think what you're doing is a big picture. It's really, and that's why I think it's so cool that you're here talking with David, because I think a lot of surfers need to know, what do I do? What do I do when I wake up? Because should I eat all this stuff? Every time I eat this certain way, I paddle out. And when I was 14, it didn't matter. I burped and I didn't care. But now I'm like 35 and it's like really uncomfortable and I have no energy when I'm out there. Wow. Or, okay, I'm going on a boat trip and I've got 10 days and the surf's pumping and I want to surf for 6 hours on all 10 of those days. And how do I eat? How do I take care of myself? And you do so much stuff with not just eating. You've also done stuff with like EMF stuff. Yeah. And you talk about sleep importance too. So I think that's just I think the audience, the Surf Splendor audience, is so passionate about surfing. And
a lot of them already follow you.
Yeah.
Oh, just really? When I pulled up your Instagram, it shows like your friends who follow that person, and it was hundreds of them already following you. So they're probably already taking your advice.
That's cool.
I have a couple of wrap-up questions though. How does alcohol fit into your world?
It doesn't fit into my world, but that's just me. I think we know pretty clearly alcohol is immediately negative. There's no, I'll say something that's striking, but I think there's no healthy dose of alcohol. But that doesn't mean you can't, or one should not ever drink alcohol. It's part of the balance, Just realize that like drinking alcohol is not doing anything good for any part of your body at all, period. Yeah. We know that even an average of 1 drink per day thins the neocortex of the brain over time. So when alcohol has never resonated with me as a human. I remember I got drunk for the first time when I was in college. I was a really late bloomer. And I woke up the next day and I had a bad headache and I thought, why would I do this? This doesn't feel good to me at all. And now I want to get up, I want to surf, I want to do martial arts, I want to feel good. So it doesn't really work for me. And I think that if someone is drinking a lot, it really is a challenge to say why are you drinking so much?
Yeah. What was behind the move to Costa Rica?
Surfing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was 95% surfing. For me, success is being able to do the things that I love and that bring me joy every day. And before Costa Rica, I was living in Austin, Texas, and I built a business in Austin that sells organs in capsules. It's called Heart and Soil Supplements. And I was in Austin for about a year getting the business going with a team. And during the time, I really believed in what I was doing. It was about 4 years ago. And at the same time, I kind of felt myself withering because there just wasn't a lot in Austin that I thought was fun. I don't get as much enjoyment in a gym as I do in the ocean. And I had a foil board, so I have an electric foil and I would take it out to the lake and foil around, but it wasn't the same feeling. And then I went to Costa Rica on a vacation. I was coming back from Africa from seeing the 𝗲𝗄𝗃. I went to Costa Rica for 7 days because I'd heard, you need to go there. And it's a great place to really progress in your surfing. I've kind of been stuck in this level, beginner intermediate for a long time. And I never left. I just felt this is such a good quality of life. So I love so many things about Costa Rica. I love the ocean. Obviously the warm water helps. The waves are good. It's less crowded depending where you go. Having sun every day felt really rich to me, wealthy in terms of sun, sun wealth, just being warm and having access to sun is super important. And I just thought, man, this is such a good quality of life. Good. And I still live there.
Do you think you'll stay forever? Do you?
Possibly. I have an awesome house. I just built a really cool pool with a deep end for breath holding. I have a skate ramp in my house that I built. Yeah. It's a 70-foot long, 26-foot wide concrete skate ramp with a huge roof to practice surf skating. And I've never lived anywhere that feels better to me. I think I probably will live there for most of my life, but I think that for me now, I want to live in places that are warm with good waves.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad to hear you telling that story about the quality of life thing, because I think so many of, and you just made a huge move too, but so many of us, just because of the economics nowadays, it's like you bite off a lot, you're committed to some job to get that paycheck that you just stay where you're at for a long period of time, even if you are sacrificing quality of life. And the benefit is convenience probably a lot of time. Like, hey, I'm around, the weather's nice here and I have access to good restaurants and whatever. So I can compromise staying here. And you get stuck in that mindset and you forget what it's like to actually go and live outdoors and have access to surfing. And
yeah, I mean, Costa Rica's outdoor lifestyle most of the time. I mean, my house is almost all open air,
Yeah.
There's huge doors and they're always open and screens and,
it's invaluable.
It's very unique.
Yeah.
It's a different way of life.
As it relates to quality of life, you generate a ton of content on the internet. That's also something that you need to service. I'm just curious, can you do that forever? Does it feel like an obligation? Do you feel like you're on a hamster wheel?
Not really. So I learned something when I was first starting out that's really stuck with me. And no one had ever told me this. I feel like this should be taught in elementary school and probably repeated like every level of our education, whether it's traditional or not. And it's this kind of counterintuitive concept that if you do the thing you're passionate about, it fuels your quote work. No one ever told me that. Like, I wish my dad had told me. So it was like, look, if you're feeling burnt out in your job, go do something that you really like to do. Like, and not spending time with your family. Like, it's selfish. Like, do what you like to do. If it's bowling, if it's dancing, if it's slackline, if it's surfing, if it's skiing, if it's snowboarding, if it's climbing, if it's hiking, like, do the thing that brings you unbridled joy, horseback riding, whatever it is. Like, doing that thing for us as humans that just makes us smile and really feel like that's my favorite thing to do. And again, it's completely selfish. It involves not your family. It's not like I'm playing with my kids. No, like, what do you like to do? Be selfish was the advice I got, and do the thing that you just get joy from. And that just like lights a fire in your life. And you're like, oh, as long as that is full and that cup is full, like, I enjoy doing everything else in my life. But if I don't surf, you start to feel like, then it starts to feel like it's a burden. And you're like, oh, I mean, you can do that. We've all done that in our lives where you think like, I'm doing this for the good of people in my life or my friends or my family or humanity. But I think we only have so much reserve for that. And eventually you get burned out, but it doesn't feel like I'm as likely to burn out when I get to live in a place like Costa Rica and surf every day and just do things that are pure play and just joyous.
Good.
And that's different for every person.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Glad you figured that out.
I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
Final. You would say that you, a routine is what allows you to do that. You get up early, you surf every day, whether it's, unless it's way too big or pouring rain or whatever. But for the most part, you like do that first. You don't look at your phone. You prioritize your health first, and then once it's like a battery charge, and once you're charged, you're like, okay, I can attack it. Is that kind of
it is? Yeah, it is true. Yeah, I've gotten into a bad habit of looking at my phone a little bit before I go surf, just check. But I don't stay long. Usually in Costa Rica, it's by the equator, so the sun sets and goes down about the same time all year. It's strange being in California. I got up this morning and I was like, why isn't the sun up yet? Like, it takes so long.
It's just started to change the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, but in Costa Rica, it's always up at like 5:20, 5:30 in the morning. So I'm always awake at 5:30 or 5:20. And usually by 6 o'clock, I'm either in the ocean or I'm on my way to the ocean every morning. So like, it's just how I start the day. And that's just a unique thing that you can do in Central America. This morning, it's like pitch black at 6 o'clock. I can't go surfing now. I got to wait.
It's crazy.
Yeah. But I try not to get too involved in work projects and stuff. That's just how I'm able to structure my life.
Yeah, now. I think that's a big one, the discipline of because nowadays we were saying about technology. I think the good thing of the technology is I would have known about.
Yeah, we wouldn't have connected.
Yeah. And what you do, the being able to listen to people's stories and get inspired and learn things. It's so amazing, But having that discipline of not too much time on the social media or on your phone. It's very easy to get caught on there, especially if you have a lot of friends, texting and whatever. But yeah, I have to say that would be, as for me, I have so much stuff going on that if I don't get that little bit of time in the ocean and stuff too, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I have like endless passion for surfing and helping people. That's I love to help people. So yeah.
Side note, but listeners would appreciate hearing your response to this. Did you see who I dropped an interview with yesterday?
No.
Richie Collins.
Oh, did you?
It's a two-parter because it went so long, but in part 2, he tells a really good story about you.
Oh, really? I always liked Richie. I used to tell him, I'd be like, Richie, you can't say those things. I'm like advising him, I'm like, dude, you can't say that kind of stuff.
You may tell him that after you listen to the podcast too. But the story,
I'm like, you're gonna get in trouble. I just would picture, I'm like, they're gonna stop sponsoring him if he like had genuine concern for him.
Yeah. But, well, the story he told about you was surfing. I think it was 𝗕𝗵𝗱, maybe Southside, and the waves are huge. And you needed a score. He had just gotten a wave. He was paddling out, and the set came right to you. And it was a left, and it was going right into like the mid section pylons, that outcropping, and you did a massive backside floater.
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No.
And he was like, he's looking at you, and he's going, "Oh shit! Like if he lands this, I lose the heat." If he doesn't land it, he's going to get exploded into the pier because it was like right in front of the pylons where he threw the big floater. And sure enough, you didn't land. Like you came down with the lip and just got exploded. And so his thought in his telling of the story was to save you. He was like, I've got to deviate from my path to safety
what a guy.
And go and like find Brad.
Yeah,
and thankfully you were okay.
No, I would say two things. One is people call it like it's the floater. I didn't try to do a floater. If I tried to do a floater, I think I would have made it. I tried to hit the lip, and I tried to come up and do like a boo and like a hitting of the lip. And then what happened was I folded over onto it like that. I went a little bit past it, and so I went into the floater. And what happens is my body, the board goes. I got to think about it, but board goes one way and my body goes the other way. So I tried to reach down and sort of pull. My body's this way, and if I was trying to do a floater, I would have stayed this way until I was ready to come off, and then jumped off of it. So that's one, and then the other one was I saw him in Spain because he was with his daughter, and I was coaching Parker Coffin. And he came up and he goes, Brad's coaching Connor. They never mentioned that Brad's coaching. Why don't they ever mention you? And I'm kind of like, yeah. Yeah. It was like he was all passionate about it. It was like nice to, like it was cool. It was cool. But anyway, good. Yeah, I'll have a good listen there.
Yeah. Final thought or final question for both you guys. We'll start with Paul. Whose boards are you riding?
𝗕𝗄𝗄𝗋s right now, probably. I mean, again, I'm not really good enough to really appreciate the finer points of various surfboards, but I really like the 𝗕𝗄𝗋s. I rode a Power Tiger today for the first time. I've got a Red Tiger in Costa Rica that I like, and I thought, maybe trying this one instead. Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. Does 𝗕𝗄𝗋 know that you're riding his boards?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Brad,
he does now.
Yeah. Brad, what are you riding?
Oh, I rode a CI Pro 2 today. Just, like I kind of mostly ride Christensen's boards, but sometimes I branch out just because I want to feel different things. And the pros are talking about riding different models and different things. So I kind of like to try stuff to be able to weigh in myself. It's like I see it like you would imagine the race car driver mechanic would know the power differences between the McLaren and the other cars, and then it helps me think about stuff for my students. Like maybe they would go good with this lesser rocker or this type of. It's just it helps me think about future because I'm always thinking about what's next. How. So as I'm training younger surfers to be top level surfers in the world, I'm always thinking about. Well, how are people going to be surfing 5 years from now? Because 5 years from now, this person I'm working with could be best in the world, and they can't be just as good as the guys today. They've got to be, or girls, they've got to be 5 years better than they are today. So how do you.
So when you want a CI Pro 2.0 Pro, do you just go buy it off the rack?
No, I know the guys from CI because I used to ride for Channel Islands.
Yeah.
So I just said, I actually was interested in just getting 2 because one of my students, well, actually one of the guys doing WaveKi, he's like in his 50s. He used to be a pro. His name's Matt Coleman. He told me he's riding them, and we talk, and he says, I really like the way this feels. And we're okay, cool. So share some ideas, but I just talked to the guys at Devon at Channel Islands and
got you dialed.
Yeah, no, for them, they get like, if I get a wave on it and I post it, they get a little bit of publicity out of it. I don't ask for them free or anything like that, but I don't have to pay
cool
retail.
Yeah.
But,
good. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you both very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We did it.
Yeah.
Surf Splendor.